A vast trans-Eurasian trade system once stretched across deserts, mountains, and empires moving goods, technologies, armies, and ideas in ways that reshaped the world forever. Today, we call it the Silk Road, but in its own time, it was far more than a highway for merchants. It was a living, breathing network of human ambition, innovation, and cultural exchange. Every caravan that set off from Chang'an, every ship that sailed from an Indian Ocean port, and every traveler crossing the Persian plateau carried something more valuable than silk or spices. They carried stories, beliefs, and discoveries that would transform entire civilizations. In this journey, we step back into the world of ancient traders, diplomats, monks, and adventurers who risked everything to cross thousands of miles of unpredictable terrain. From the fragrant bazaars of Samarkand to the imperial courts of China and Rome, the Silk Road reveals how deeply connected humanity has always been, even long before the modern age of globalization. This story is not just about trade. It is about how ideas sparked revolutions in science, religion, and technology. It is about how distant societies learned from one another, often without ever meeting face to face. And it is about the extraordinary resilience of those who dared to explore the unknown. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden forces that shaped our world, make sure to support this channel. Please like the video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey into the past. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows us to bring you even more compelling explorations of the world's great civilizations. The Silk Road was never just a trade route born from peaceful exchanges. It was shaped by conflict, ambition, and the clash of empires whose destinies intertwined across continents. As Rome expanded eastward, hungry for prestige and wealth, it found itself drawn toward lands it barely understood. And at the edge of this pursuit stood the Parthian Empire, a formidable power guarding the western gate of the trans-Eurasian world. Their encounter at the Battle of Kara would not only alter the balance of power in the ancient world, but also deepen Rome's fascination with the mysterious luxuries coming from far beyond Persia, especially the shimmering threads of Chinese silk that would one day give the Silk Road its name. The story begins with Marcus Licinius Crassus, a Roman triumvir whose ambition surpassed even his immense wealth. Eager to secure military glory, he marched into Parthian territory believing that Roman legions, hardened by decades of conquest, could overcome any force that stood in their way. What awaited him in the desert plains near Kara was unlike anything Rome had ever faced. The Parthians did not rely on heavy infantry or rigid formations. Instead, they mastered mobility, deception, and precision. Their cavalry archers could release arrows at a full gallop, circling the Roman lines with unrelenting speed. Their heavily armored cataphracts delivered decisive charges that shattered Roman confidence. Crassus soon realized that he had walked into a battlefield designed perfectly for his enemy. As the sun blazed over the sands, the Parthian horse archers unleashed tactic after tactic, including the famous Parthian shot, firing backward while retreating and striking Roman soldiers who believed they had forced an advantage. The Roman formations, disciplined yet inflexible, struggled to adapt. With each hour, exhaustion and confusion grew. Messages became scattered, supply lines stretched thin, and the shimmering dust clouds raised by the Parthian cavalry seemed almost supernatural to those who had never witnessed such warfare. By nightfall, the once proud Roman army was collapsing, and Crassus' grand expedition had turned into a devastating disaster that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Yet the consequences of Kara went far beyond Rome's military humiliation. The battle exposed Rome to a deeper truth. Beyond Parthia lay civilizations whose sophistication and wealth rivaled their own. Among the most coveted treasures filtering westward was Chinese silk, a fabric so fine and luminous that Roman elites believed it was woven from water or the hair of magical creatures. The Parthians, acting as middlemen, fiercely guarded the source of this extraordinary material, inflating its value and controlling the flow of trade between East and West. Rome's desire for silk intensified after Carrhae. Not diminished. Even in defeat, Roman curiosity burned brighter, and the routes connecting the Mediterranean to Asia became increasingly important for commerce, diplomacy, and the spread of new ideas. Over time, silk transformed from a luxury item into a symbol of cultural prestige, diplomacy, and global exchange. Roman writers debated its influence, some praising its beauty while others complained that it made Roman citizens appear decadent. Meanwhile, the Parthians capitalized on their strategic position, using their control over trade routes to strengthen their empire and maintain balance against Rome's ambitions. The clash at Carrhae, therefore, was more than a single military encounter. It marked a turning point in how empires recognized each other's power and influence, creating a complex web of relationships that spanned continents. This moment, forged in the heat of battle, helped set the stage for one of the most influential trade networks in human history. The Silk Road, named for the very fabric Rome desired, emerged as a conduit where conflict, commerce, and culture intertwined. What began with arrows and dust clouds on a distant battlefield became part of a much larger story, a story of civilizations reaching out across vast distances, driven by curiosity, ambition, and the promise of connection. Across the vast stretches of steppe that bordered the great empires of antiquity, power did not grow from towering walls or dense infantry formations but from the symbiosis between humans, animals, and technology. As Rome struggled to comprehend the speed and precision of Parthian cavalry at Carrhae, the roots of that mastery traced back to innovations that had transformed nomadic societies into formidable military forces. The combination of domesticated horses, the composite recurved bow, mass-produced socketed arrowheads, and strict discipline forged mounted armies that could outmaneuver even the largest imperial legions. These developments did not arise in isolation. They evolved over centuries of life on the steppe, shaped by harsh climates, constant movement, and the need for unity in environments where survival hinged on cooperation and adaptability. The horse, once a wild and elusive creature, became the heart of steppe culture. For nomadic peoples, it was more than a means of transportation. It was a companion, a source of sustenance, and the essential partner in warfare. Children learned to ride before they could properly speak, and entire societies revolved around the rhythms of herding and migration. This intimate relationship created riders who'd control their mounts with effortless precision, guiding them with knee pressure or subtle shifts of weight, leaving their hands free to wield weapons even at full gallop. Such skill allowed cavalry forces not merely to travel quickly but to fight with a fluidity that stunned sedentary armies unaccustomed to battles dictated by motion. Yet mastery of the horse alone did not explain the dominance witnessed at battles like Carrhae. The weapon that truly defined the steppe warrior was the composite bow, crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew bonded together. It stored more energy than a simple wooden bow and could deliver arrows with lethal force across long distances. Its recurved design made it compact enough to use on horseback, allowing archers to strike with accuracy while weaving through the battlefield. This was not just a technological achievement. It represented centuries of refining craft knowledge, passing skills down through families who understood exactly how moisture, heat, and tension shaped the performance of each weapon. The arrows themselves reflected a similar evolution. Socketed arrowheads, produced in large quantities by specialized metalworkers, created a reliable supply of ammunition that could be used in extended campaigns. These arrowheads, fixed securely into shafts, penetrated armor more effectively than earlier designs and could be tailored for different purposes, some intended to wound, others to pierce heavy defenses, and still others to cause fear with their distinctive whistling sound. Mass production did more than increase firepower. It standardized weaponry across units, ensuring that every archer could rely on consistent performance during the heat of battle. All these elements would have meant little without the discipline that bound steppe warriors together. Life in the open grasslands demanded cooperation. Herds had to be protected from predators and rival clans. Migrations coordinated with the seasons, and resources managed with precision. This translated naturally into military organization. Leaders issued commands through signals and coordinated maneuvers that allowed entire units to move as a single organism. Riders practiced feigned retreats, rapid encirclements, and synchronized volleys until they became instinctive. In battle, this discipline allowed mounted armies to dictate the pace of combat, striking where the enemy was weakest and withdrawing before they could be cornered. The spectacle of such forces in motion was both mesmerizing and terrifying to outside observers. Dust clouds billowed as hundreds of hooves pounded the earth. Yet within that chaos there was always order. Lines shifted seamlessly into arcs, arcs into circles, and circles into sudden charges that broke enemy ranks. Against this dynamic style of warfare, the rigid formations of infantry-based empires struggled. Their strength lay in holding ground, but cavalry armies refused to fight on those terms. They attacked, withdrew, and returned from unexpected angles, wearing down opponents physically and psychologically until the battle was won long before the final blow. This combination of biological partnership, technological innovation, artistic craftsmanship, and collective discipline shaped the mounted forces that dominated so much of Eurasian history. It was this power that Rome confronted at Kara, and this legacy that influenced the movement of people, goods, and ideas across the vast superhighway later known as the Silk Road. Long before the Silk Road became a conduit for merchants, philosophers, and diplomats, it was shaped by an older and more volatile relationship. The tense frontier where the agricultural heartlands of China met the boundless grasslands of the northern steppe. Along this frontier, the Han dynasty faced recurring pressure from nomadic confederations whose mobility, skill in mounted combat, and intimate bond with the land gave them advantages that the settled empire struggled to counter. Raids swept across China's borders with unpredictable force, threatening farms, trade outposts, and fledgling towns. These encounters were not merely clashes of armies but confrontations between two very different worlds, each pushing the other to evolve in ways that would eventually carve the foundations of the Silk Road. For the early Han rulers, the steppe represented both danger and mystery. The nomads who roamed its wide expanses possessed an agility that Chinese infantry could not match. Their riders appeared suddenly from distant horizons, striking with composite bows before vanishing into the open plains. Attempts to confront them using traditional formations proved ineffective, forcing the Han court to reassess its entire military doctrine. Over time, the Chinese state realized that to defend its borders, it would have to understand and adopt the very methods that made the nomads formidable. This shift began with an ambitious transformation of the army itself. Horses were bred in larger numbers, herds were monitored with unprecedented care, and entire units were trained specifically for mounted warfare. Chinese generals studied steppe tactics, adapting the fluidity and speed of cavalry maneuvers into their own strategies. What emerged was a hybrid force, one that retained the discipline of imperial armies while incorporating the mobility that life on the steppe demanded. Yet defensive measures alone were not enough. The constant threat along the frontier compelled the Han dynasty to look beyond its immediate borders, seeking alliances, buffer zones, and new sources of strength. This search drove China westward along the corridors that would eventually form the eastern spine of the Silk Road. Diplomats such as Genghis Khan embarked on perilous journeys across unfamiliar regions, forging relationships with distant kingdoms and bringing back intelligence that reshaped China's understanding of the world. Through these missions, the Han court discovered new possibilities for trade, military cooperation, and cultural contact. As China extended its reach, it began to secure routes across Central Asia, building garrisons, establishing protectorates, and negotiating with local rulers who controlled key mountain passes and fertile valleys. These expansions transformed isolated pathways into structured arteries of exchange. Goods that once moved in small quantities now flowed through networks guarded by imperial forces. Silk, lacquerware, and porcelain traveled westward, while horses, precious stones, metalwork, and new agricultural products journeyed toward the east. Religious ideas, artistic styles, and scientific knowledge also moved along these routes, carried by merchants, monks, and envoys who bridged cultures with every step. The frontier that had once symbolized conflict gradually became the threshold of a wider world where economic necessity, diplomatic ambition, and shared curiosity intertwined. The steppe nomads, who had once appeared as threats on China's northern horizon, became integral to this unfolding system. Some served as guides, escorts, or intermediaries, while others maintained their autonomy, influencing the balance of power across Eurasia. Their presence ensured that the Silk Road remained dynamic, shaped not only by imperial ambition but also by the rhythm of nomadic life. The Han dynasty's push westward, fueled by the need to manage this relationship, created conditions in which cultural exchange could flourish on an unprecedented scale. Through conflict, adaptation, and expansion, China and the steppe became inseparable parts of a larger story. The pressures of the frontier forged strategies, alliances, and pathways that helped transform scattered routes into a vast transcontinental network. What began with raids and countermeasures evolved into one of the most influential webs of connection in human history, linking civilizations through trade, knowledge, and shared discovery across thousands of miles. As the Silk Road expanded under the pressures, ambitions, and adaptations of the great empires, it transformed from a defensive frontier and contested battleground into a thriving corridor of wealth and cultural exchange. What began with the clash between Rome and Parthia, the innovations of mounted warfare on the steppe, and the Han dynasty's push westward eventually gave rise to a network where distant civilizations encountered one another through objects more eloquent than words. Among the most symbolic of these objects were Kushan jade, Roman gold, and Chinese silk materials that carried stories of the people who mined them, crafted them, traded them, and cherished them. These items traveled across deserts, mountains, and oceans, linking cultures that would otherwise have remained strangers. Nowhere was this convergence more visible than at outposts like the Jade Gate, a remote threshold where caravans from every corner of Eurasia passed on their way into and out of China's vast imperial realm. The Jade Gate, known in Chinese sources as Human Pass, stood as a sentinel at the western edge of the Han Empire. To reach it, travelers crossed endless stretches of wind-beaten desert, following a ribbon of life sustained by wells and fortified stations. Approaching the gate meant leaving behind the familiar rhythms of China's heartland and stepping into the open world of Central Asia, where nomadic kingdoms, oasis towns, and distant empires intersected. The gate itself was not simply a military fortification but a symbolic threshold, a place where merchants declared their goods, where envoys exchanged credentials, and where the empire extended its protection to travelers embarking on journeys that could last months or even years. The goods that passed through it reflected the astonishing diversity of the Silk Road's participants. From the southwest came the Kushans, whose empire bridged northern India, Afghanistan, and parts of Central Asia. Their artisans carved jade into ornaments and ceremonial pieces that showcased a fusion of Indian symbolism, Central Asian craftsmanship, and Hellenistic artistic influence. These objects were treasured not only for their beauty, but for the cultural prestige they represented. Embodying the Kushans' role as mediators between civilizations, their jade traveled north and east toward the Han frontier, where it was exchanged for silk and metalwork, and then sent onward to new destinations. From the west, Roman traders and intermediaries brought gold coins, jewelry, and luxury objects that spoke to the wealth of an empire stretching around the Mediterranean. Roman gold was prized in Central Asia and China not merely for its material value, but for the intricate portraits and inscriptions stamped onto each coin. These images of emperors and symbols carried political messages, revealing glimpses of a world whose rulers were rarely seen but widely imagined. Many of these coins found their way into tomes, religious offerings, or treasuries far from Rome, becoming part of local traditions and artistic styles. At the heart of this exchange lay Chinese silk, the product that inspired fascination, desire, and long-distance trade across continents. Silk garments shimmered in the courts of distant rulers, their fine threads revealing mastery in cultivation and weaving that no foreign craftsman could replicate. Even when Rome attempted to unravel the secrets of its production, the monopoly remained firmly in Chinese hands. As silk traveled westward, it accumulated stories, interpretations, and legends, becoming a symbol of luxury, diplomacy, and cultural prestige. In return, it drew foreign merchants into China's orbit, establishing a cycle of exchange that linked the fates of empires across the continent. At places like the Jade Gate, these objects converged. Caravans paused to rest, repair equipment, and prepare for the trials ahead. Languages mixed in the dry desert wind as travelers swapped news from lands separated by thousands of miles. Each object carried across this threshold became part of a wider narrative in which empires learned about one another not through conquest alone, but through curiosity, admiration, and mutual dependence. Jade, gold, silk each represented a world, and together they wove the fabric of a network that did more than enrich economies. It connected imaginations, reshaped identities, and helped define the cultural landscape of Eurasia. In this movement of goods and ideas across the Jade Gate and countless other points along the Silk Road, the world grew smaller, not through force but through exchange. The materials that passed from hand to hand reflected the deepening relationships forged across the vast superhighway that linked distant civilizations, making their destinies part of one continuous story. Across the vast sweep of the Eurasian steppe, where wind carved patterns into endless grasslands and horizons stretched without end, new powers emerged that would again reshape the Silk Road and the civilizations connected by it. Long after the Han Empire fortified its western gates and the Kushans, Romans, and Parthians enriched the arteries of long-distance exchange, new waves of mounted peoples rode out of the steppe with a force that shook continents. The Huns, the Avars, and later the Mongols did not simply inherit the legacy of earlier nomads. They magnified it, refining techniques of mobility, communication, and military innovation that altered the political landscape of Europe and Asia and transformed the conditions under which trade and cultural encounters flourished. The Huns were the first of these later steppe powers to crash upon the borders of settled empires with transformative impact. Emerging from the depths of Central Asia, they drove westward with speed and ferocity, pressing other tribes ahead of them and creating a chain reaction that contributed to the instability of late Roman frontiers. Their skill in mounted warfare followed the older traditions of the steppe, but the psychological effect they had on neighboring peoples was profound. Their arrival disrupted long-established systems of power and trade, pushing new groups into contact and conflict with the Roman world. Although the Huns themselves left few written records, their presence reshaped alliances, settlement patterns, and military strategies across a vast region, demonstrating once more how the movements of nomadic societies could ripple far beyond the plains they called home. The Avars continued this tradition of disruption and transformation when they moved into Eastern Europe centuries later. Their arrival introduced new technologies and strategic patterns that altered the way warfare was conducted across the region. Among their most influential contributions was the widespread use of the stirrup. This simple yet revolutionary device allowed riders to stabilize themselves in the saddle, enabling heavier armor, more forceful strikes with lances, and greater balance in the chaos of battle. The stirrup changed the dynamics of mounted combat and played a role in shaping the emergence of cavalry-based elites in medieval Europe. Through the Avars, the steppe once again served as a conduit for innovations that would influence societies far removed from their original homelands. Yet the most profound transformation came with the rise of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. Under the leadership of figures like Genghis Khan, the Mongols united the steppe tribes into a single, disciplined force capable of projecting power across an unprecedented range. Their conquests brought most of Eurasia stretching from Korea to the fringes of Europe under one overarching imperial framework. Violence and upheaval accompanied this expansion, but in its aftermath emerged a period of relative stability known as the Pax Mongolica. For the first time in history, the Silk Road fell under the protection of a single political order, creating conditions where caravans could travel across thousands of miles with significantly reduced risk. Under the Pax Mongolica, merchants moved goods with greater confidence. Scholars and envoys crossed borders with official support, and distant regions came into sustained contact. The Mongol postal system, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, facilitated communication and encouraged the movement of ideas and technologies across regions that had previously interacted only intermittently. Paper, gunpowder, navigational tools, artistic styles, and medical knowledge traveled along these secured routes, shaping the development of societies on both ends of Eurasia. Cities like Samarkand, Karakoram, and Kambalik flourished as hubs where diverse cultures converged under the vast Mongol umbrella. As with earlier moments in Silk Road history, the rise of these mounted powers revealed the dual nature of the steppe, a source of both upheaval and connection. The Huns and Avars forced empires to adapt and innovate, while the Mongols created a unique environment where long-distance exchange could thrive on a scale never before seen. Through conquest, adaptation, and the eventual establishment of stability, these nomadic forces played a crucial role in shaping the interconnected world that stretched from Europe to East Asia. Their legacy preserved the vitality of the Silk Road, ensuring that its role as a superhighway of goods, ideas, and cultures endured across centuries of change. In the centuries following the great conquests of the steppe empires, when the dust of warfare had settled and the vast territories of Eurasia began to breathe under more predictable rhythms, the Silk Road entered one of its most captivating chapters. Stability, though fragile and never permanent, allowed merchants, scholars, monks, and adventurers to move more freely across the spine of Asia. Caravans still faced deserts, mountains, and storms, yet a sense of possibility replaced the dread that had once accompanied those journeys. It was in this climate of guarded peace that travelers from far-off lands began to record not only the goods they encountered, but the marvels, customs, and ideas that revealed the cultural richness of the East. Among those travelers, none became as famous or as influential as Marco Polo, whose accounts of Asian cities, palaces, markets, and wonders would ignite the imagination of Europe and subtly redirect the course of future exploration. Marco Polo's journey unfolded at a moment when the Mongol Empire, despite internal divisions, still maintained enough unity to permit safe passage through its territories. Posts, way stations, and guards stretched like a chain across thousands of miles, allowing travelers to move with an ease unimaginable in earlier eras. For someone like Polo, this meant exposure to societies that functioned on scales unlike anything known in medieval Europe. He saw cities lit by candles in quantities that seemed impossible, bureaucracies that recorded every detail of administration, and markets stocked with goods from India, Persia, Southeast Asia, and China itself. These encounters were not simply observations. They were windows into worlds where technology, wealth, and cultural sophistication had grown under entirely different historical trajectories. The stories he later carried back to Venice were filled with descriptions that bordered on the unbelievable for European audiences. He spoke of paper money used across the empire, of coal that burned hotter and longer than wood, of engineers who designed canals and massive irrigation systems, and of palaces whose halls shimmered with precious metals and lacquered designs. When he described the grandeur of Kublai Khan's court, the ceremonial processions, the organization of trade, and the variety of peoples who served the empire, he presented a portrait of a world both distant and strangely interconnected. These tales did more than entertain. They challenged Europeans to reconsider their assumptions about geography, wealth, and global possibility. The Silk Road, during this era of relative peace, became a kind of open book in which each traveler added new lines. Merchants brought back scents of spices, patterns of textiles, and techniques of craftsmanship. Buddhist monks shared translations of sacred texts. Muslim scholars exchanged theories of astronomy and medicine. And as these threads wove together, they broadened Europe's understanding of Asia far beyond rumor and legend. Marco Polo's influence was amplified by this larger environment of exchange. His stories became emblematic of a world that was far richer and more complex than the boundaries of Christendom suggested. European curiosity, once awakened, began to grow in new directions. Scholars pored over Polo's writings, debating whether his accounts were exaggerated or whether the wonders he described reflected hidden possibilities beyond known maps. Merchants questioned how they might reach the wealth of the East more directly, bypassing middlemen along the overland routes. In courts and ports across Europe, a quiet shift began, the idea that distant lands might be reachable not only through caravans but by sea. Centuries later, this shift contributed to the momentum that propelled explorers westward across the oceans, seeking alternative connections to the worlds Polo had described. Thus the peaceful trade of the Silk Road, cultivated through the protection of empires and the resilience of merchants, did far more than move material goods. It transmitted stories, ideas, and visions that stirred imaginations across continents. Through voices like Marco Polo's, the world became at once larger and more reachable, binding Europe and Asia with threads of curiosity that would shape global history long after the caravans had faded from the sands. From the earliest jade caravans to the rise of mounted empires and the travels of curious adventurers, the Silk Road shaped a world where ideas flowed as powerfully as goods. Among the most transformative of these ideas was the discovery that fire, saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, simple materials known for centuries, could be combined into a substance capable of changing the nature of conflict forever. Gunpowder, first developed in China for ritual and experimental purposes, began its long journey westward during the era of Mongol expansion. As Mongol armies swept across Eurasia, they carried knowledge from one corner of the continent to another, unintentionally turning the Silk Road into a pathway not only for luxury goods but for technological revolutions that would redefine global power. When gunpowder reached the Middle East and Europe, it found societies already embroiled in competing ambitions, territorial disputes, and shifting alliances. At first, its potential was uncertain, but as craftsmen refined early cannons and handheld firearms, its impact became undeniable. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 offered one of the earliest demonstrations of how profoundly this invention could reshape warfare. There, the thunder of primitive cannon fire echoed across the battlefield, startling armies accustomed to steel and arrows. Though the weapons were still crude, they signaled the beginning of a new era, one in which fortifications, tactics, and even the meaning of military power would need to be reimagined. Over the following centuries, gunpowder helped give rise to the great gunpowder empires: the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mongols. Each mastered the art of combining mobility, firepower, and administrative strength to govern diverse and populous territories. These empires became cultural and economic giants, drawing wealth from trade routes that spanned continents. Cities flourished as centers of scholarship, art, business, and innovation. Through them, gunpowder continued its spread, eventually shaping the maritime powers of Europe and helping forge the global systems of commerce and exploration that would connect every inhabited continent. And so, the Silk Road story woven across millennia comes full circle. What began as pathways carved by nomads, enriched by merchants, and secured by empires became the foundation of a connected world. Goods, technologies, beliefs, and discoveries traveled farther than their creators ever imagined. Every step, from the hooves of steppe horses to the pages of Marco Polo's writing and the thunder of gunpowder, carried humanity toward an ever wider horizon. Thank you for joining this journey through the ancient superhighway that linked worlds. If you enjoyed exploring this story, please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing for more deep dives into the forces that shaped our shared past. Your curiosity helps keep history alive,